Hi, welcome to the XY Chromies, Confidently Uncertain, a show where two Army vets turned renewable energy engineers discuss veteran issues, geopolitics, engineering, science, and everything in between. I'm your host, Pearson Guest, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Richard Ellis. How are you doing today, Richard?
I'm good, Pierce. Good to see you.
It's great to see you too. So we decided we would kick off this episode not talking about good news, but just talking about some projects I'm working on right now. Or maybe
Love to hear
generally,
them.
yeah, some projects. And then also generally, I guess I wanted to start off the show by talking about I had a very fulfilling engineering consulting week this last week. And then the last couple weeks has been very fulfilling work weeks. And what I mean by that is as an engineer consultant, you're doing engineering, but there's always this business development aspect to the work because you're mindful of solving problems that clients have, and you're listening to solve problems, right? And typically those problems, if not defined in the scope, and the scope of work, that is this is a technical document that is written, and many different industries have scopes of work too. It's not just beholden to engineering consulting. It's a common term, but it's a technical term as well. And it's a document that usually it comes about from a study or like a feasibility study in our case, where a client may contract us or put out a bid for some work to be done. For instance, hi, we've got, and one of the projects I'm working on would go like this. We have some solar facilities that are peppered throughout some different areas. They're sporadic. They're not large, but they're supporting key infrastructure. So this client has these solar facilities. And like many clients at this point, 30 or 40 years into the solar revolution, it's a hodgepodge of various panel types, both crystal and mono and polycrystal types of PV panels, inverters that are are limited by 14 amps, very tiny outback inverters that are old, a litany of different battery systems now, right? Different LFP, LMC, a bunch of different stuff, and they're looking to standardize and upgrade these systems, right? And this is a project I am working on right now, but a lot of times this kind of stuff comes about. A feasibility study is what happens before work actually occurs to get the work done. It's basically, hey, what would it take to do what we want to do? And what exactly did we want to do? So what that means is like, the client could be like, hey, we want to upgrade our solar facilities, but they just know that they want something new. That doesn't mean they know what they want. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
Remember, I work with college seniors who are doing the exact same thing, just at a
yes,
smaller scale.
yeah, exactly. They're like, ooh, I know I want to do something in this. And then they're like, but what do I want to do in this? What does that actually entail? And so for instance, that could mean like, hey, we're looking to upgrade our solar, but what do we want our solar to support? Like, how much of our system do we want it to support? Do we want it to support the system 24 hours a day, which means we need to look at significant battery storage to facilitate that, right? Or alternatively, a diesel or propane generators, right? These are options that are being considered, and they're very good options. They're cheaper than batteries by a long shot, as you can imagine. The cost per kilowatt hour of propane is 40 cents. So the cost per kilowatt hour for solar is 6 cents in California. So it's essentially free. You could say solar power is basically free when the sun is shining. Do you want to take a stab at what the cost per kilowatt hour of batteries is compared to propane? Yeah, actually, you don't even propane. I'll just tell you, it's like 40 cents at max. It could be $3. I think because that market fluctuates quite a bit. We've seen it go up to $3. So that's the band I'm giving you. Now, batteries, I'll give you one hint. It's well over $100 per kilowatt hour. That's my only hint I'll give.
Yeah, I was going to come in with a wild number because uh, when we talk about a price per, you're talking about a ratio between kilowatt hours, the energy delivered by a device
Yep.
or a system, versus cost, the price per kilowatt hour. When you talk about that ratio, um, that was one that actually it took several years of being in college and working with these numbers and these figures to get my mind around. So when we talk about batteries, I'm going, oh yeah, solar's one thing that's going to have a installed rate of production and kilowatt hour price. But batteries, they've got to be between like $300 and $500 a kilowatt hour.
It's a noble guess. I'm glad you double and you 3x'd and 5x'd my hint, but you're woefully outmatched. Your 500 is half. It's about $1,000 per kilowatt
Yeah.
hour of power. And you're right; those figures, and in fact, the spreadsheet that me and my colleague that we're putting together for this project, it it's doing about 8,700 computations when we switch out one variable. We have a series of
Yeah.
variables. We have an entire year of energy usage from their the load list that they gave us. We basically develop an energy profile or for their yearly demand at each of the sites. And then we start, putting in, jamming in the numbers of like, okay, well, a PV to install over this system will last for, we do a
Hmm.
15 levelized cost of energy over 15 years. And the LCOE, this is a super important number as well. Cost per kilowatt hour, very important. Levelized
Yeah.
cost of energy, this is how we determine if a project for that's going to produce power or produce energy is going to be worth it over an amortized
Yeah.
period of time. If like, and a lot of times, so for instance, in dams, if we were switching over to hydropower, that's got really large upfront capital costs. Like if we were
Totally.
developing new dams, and when I say new dams right now, we're designing some new dams right now, but a
Hmm.
lot of the projects that are going to be new designs are pump storage as hydro. So we're looking at
Right.
reservoir developments, basically.
Yeah.
Um, Either way, these are very large capital intense projects. We're talking anywhere from at minimum 1.9 billion to most likely 3 to 6 billion on average,
Hmm.
depending on the state, maybe like 6 billion, 3 billion in Wyoming. They're looking at some potential sites, and up to $9 billion. Um, on the flip side, so the levelized cost of energy can be high, but the payback period on dams, those things last for 100 years,
Right.
and much of the equipment will last for 60, 70, 80 years without needing to be replaced. So they're
Yeah.
actually not a bad investment if you can, if you can stomach a long-term investment. All of this is to say that this is some of what goes into the design, the feasibility study, or like, hey,
Hmm.
is this worth it? We do try to figure out, is it worth it to invest in the upgrades? That's part of the scope of work. Typically, is like, hey, what is this going to cost us, and do the numbers make sense? So, anyways, we do the scope of work, and this leads to getting the project done. Basically, leads to us taking on the design portion of the project. Uh, so this week I've gotten to do a myriad of different things. I've been working on various scopes, doing some CAD drafting design. I would
Hmm.
say 33% CAD drafting design. And that's on a different project, a black start generator for a dam. That's how I've been doing. I've been working on single line diagrams, which are electrical diagrams for the solar project. So I'm currently working on that. And
Yeah.
I'm and then between those two projects, I'm also about 33% of the time reading the NEC handbook and manual. So that's the other part of what my job is. And this is, I would say, this feels very much like a full engineering consulting work, because I've also been dealing with client. We've had multiple client meetings where we walked them through our energy model that I was just talking about,
Yep.
that we have been developing, um, and kind of showed them. We basically walked them through the model so they could tell us which option they wanted to pick, because it showed a bunch of, hey, this is how much a 60 kilowatt solar system would cost. And
Hmm.
um, in this specific case, the client is basically having to make a decision of how much they want the generator, their backup generator, to run, versus how much they want the battery system to run, versus how big they actually want the solar system to be. And
Yep.
they're weighing the options between this, because each of them have downsides, right? Um,
Yeah.
the diesel generator, the propane generator, is obviously cheaper, but turning a generator on 180 times a year to top off your system, it offers other logistical problems, having to, have a fuel supply
Right.
on standby. And also, um, considering these solar projects are to try to help with carbon neutrality, having a propane
Hmm.
generator kind of
Yeah.
offsets that
Yeah.
carbon neutrality. So these are all, and that might be more of a political issue, but these, all to say that this has been a very fulfilling week as far as work goes. So how about you? How's your week been going, or your week gone?
Yeah. I think the last time we talked, I just kind of summarized the 2 weeks I took off and
Yes.
how that I was reflecting on what that meant for from someone like myself who mm, has not proportionally taken off as much time as he might.
Yeah. As you probably needed.
Yeah, as the surplus leave that I had stored up is getting kind of absurd. I'm still not at use lose levels yet, but I don't want to get there. And really, this last break kind of demonstrated that for me. So I've been back to work, and um, the cycles of universities. Well, they kind of match our public school system in this state, for example. Um, Depending on the school system, that might be a quarter model like ours. But we have a fall term that ends in December. We have a winter term that begins in January, and uh, it ends at the end of March. And the primary work that I'm doing, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about engineering consultation work, engineering consulting, um, that's what my job with the university morphed into. The university would have never posted a job description that said the applicant needs to have this much education, this much technical experience, this much, you know, uh, experience around budget management, and
Yeah.
do they know how to use Microsoft Office products? Oh, and also, are they an engineering consultant?
Yeah.
That's an impossible job description to write. And when they try to replace me, if that time ever has to come, uh, the job that I'm doing will be profoundly constrained and reduced in scope.
Yeah. Or they'll have to split it up between a couple of different, a couple different employees potentially might have to bear
Right.
the burden of your job. It's been Frankenstein together at this point. But you
Yeah.
you do act as a consultant that's trying to solve problems for groups of students, essentially, in their
Yeah.
junior and senior year. A lot of it
Totally.
is that, which is helping them go, okay, well, you know, yes, you can do it. It's possible. Having to have that question, like, and then like, is it probable though, right? Or it's possible, but is is the time cost reasonable? That, and a lot of times it's more than the cost reasonable.
Yeah.
Is the time cost reasonable for a senior that has, and especially for these renewables and even the electricals, a very jam packed 4-year degree. It's not
Yep.
130 credit business degree, or 136, a 4-year bachelor's in business. And frankly, that is what it's like 140 credits, I think, max. That's a big, and
Yeah.
that's 40 credits less than the electrical and renewable energy engineer right there. And these aren't, you know, simple credits like speech 221 or whatever, you know.
Right.
This is optics, lasers, power electronics 1 and 2, and some really, I mean, instrumentation with
Yep.
that with Dr. Melindy, man, that class, that was pushing mathematical boundaries for me, where I was feeling very much inept, to say the least.
Yeah.
Signals, I was just like, oof, this is starting to get really. I mean, and you're in the imaginary realm a lot there too, so you're just kind of like, I'm in the imaginary realm. Oh yeah, So
Yeah. For some fun late night reading, the cure to insomnia, look up the character Laplace. Yeah, just do a search for it's spelled like Laplace, like that's kind of how it's spelled, because French guy.
Yeah.
I'll think of his
French
name. What was
genius.
Yeah,
The
what was
Laplace
his name?
transform.
It was Laplace
Transform.
was his last name.
Transform was his last name. No.
Yeah, exactly. So Laplace was one of these 18th century geniuses that came up with a way to use math to articulate a where we'll think about something in time domain, which is like our normal lives, and then to rethink to take that math and then use that to say, okay, now we're going to think of something in frequency domain, and that's what we're going to talk about now. And the human mind just melts.
Oh God, yeah.
Our brain just turned to liquid.
Yeah, well, because because frequency is more complex time. I mean, like time is already really tricky to get it's iterative time. I mean, it's really tricky to get your head around time to begin with.
So the basic idea of frequency is now we're talking about things per unit second. So 1 over time.
Laplace.
Pierre Laplace.
Pierre Simon Marquis de Laplace. Wow.
Yeah.
That's good for him.
The French don't seem like a people that are delivering a whole lot on their promise of brilliance right now. I mean, they've got their own problems and challenges currently, but in the 18th century, they were delivering. They brought some really interesting things into the realm.
Well, yeah, 1749. That's before the Revolution, right? I mean, before.
Oh yes.
So, and I think Laplace, by the picture, him having paintings of himself, he was probably a lord. It looks like, because back then, if you were educated. So I don't know much about him besides he was a mathematical genius. He's responsible for a lot of really crazy shit, and my assumptions are all that he was definitely a lord and was quite rich, most likely, just by his outfit.
Order to have the time to sit and think about mathematical proofs, you had to be in a position of enough largesse and leisure that was a fun thing to do, because you weren't going to the type of career at the time which might involve factories or laboring in fields and farms.
Yeah, the guys mining coal weren't there being able to think about the frequency domain and 1 over time, 1 over time, 1 over s.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So you asked about what I've been doing this last week, and so what I wanted to mention is I'm doing something that is a mirror image of what you're doing. It's vastly less complex, although it's with people from different majors. I'm working with mechanical, manufacturing, electrical engineering, and renewable energy majors. And
so it is. I will say it's very much similar, because right now I'm working on a black start diesel generator, backup diesel generator setup. We're doing we were doing design work for this. I did a whole bunch of bus work for them. And the bus system, this is the electrical throughput system of for our listeners. This is how we deliver the power to the station service for the switch gears and switchboards and everything, the diesel generator to them, and so on and so forth. And we also have cable trays. There's bus trays and there's cable trays. The cable trays carry cables, in case you were wondering. What, you're laughing because
The reason I'm laughing is because I didn't need to interrupt you.
No, it's fine.
You literally, the focus of your academic at Enterprise had to do with electrical engineering materials. So understanding what we were talking about, voltage, current, and amps, frequency.
Yeah.
We had to really understand how these things work. In your career applied, you have to know you have to have a catalog of things in your brain and know where to find them that extend all the way down to the smallest piece of hardware that joins two brackets together that holds up a solar panel, the on off switches that go into switchgear to turn things on and off, and not that you have to know the exact mixing ratios of cement to aggregate, but you have to understand how concrete works in the foundations and footings that go under the devices that handle the switchgear.
What we had to change our puncture holes for the cable tray because of course in dams there's pillars all over the place. So when you're
Yeah.
designing stuff, you've taken pictures as much as you can, but you don't remember the
Yeah.
layout as much as you can. For me,
No.
I haven't even been to this site, so I'm just going off of some pictures you have. You just puncture a hole in the concrete. You're like, all right, well, because they have a huge, like a cable assembly rack, like they have a whole,
Yeah.
um, in dams, typically they'll just have a whole corridor full of cable trays, like just like you just all on top of each other, and it makes sense. So it'll be like a common throughway where a bunch of cable trays meet up with each other. We
Yeah.
were designing some puncture, we were doing some bus tray. The client, we took a break from this work a year ago. We didn't, they were like, okay, work's on hold because the client runs out of
Right.
budget. And cities and bureaucracies and county power companies, they do this all the time. Oh, we're out of budget for this project for now. So they just put the project on hold.
Yep.
People you've ever seen like road work that's done on the side of the road and no one does anything to it for like, a month or two. That work's been put on hold. They ran out of budget for that work or something put them on hold.
Yep.
That happened with this project. Now they have budget again, but you know what? They've decided they're gonna put a whole new cable system in after this. So get rid of all the bus work we had designed, all that work we did. They're like, yeah, undo all of that. We're just gonna try and put them on the existing cable trays that we have. So I'm doing this work. That's a black start. We're still doing the designing the dam. I'm doing the solar work, and then right now, so very similar. I'm working on a steam gen project where they're using a steam plant to break down waste in wastewater.
Right.
What's called fog, which is food, oil, and
Hmm.
liquid, and that's
Yep.
like the combination. Which I have no experience in any of this, but they're doing some methane capture on it and some other things,
Hmm.
and I've just been put on the project as the one of the newer engineers on it, so I'm just kind of completely out of my element on that. But it's a new, like I said, it's a different engineering fields, and you're just kind of a. That's why it feels very fulfilling right now because it's like you're right.
Yep.
There's so much stuff you don't know. I think at the 3-year mark for me, it's like
Hmm.
I know I don't know most things. Like that's not with the solar project. I'm doing these solar single
Yep.
lines. I've done one in school, but now in the real world, I'm like, okay, well, what does a rectifier actually look like? Do we sell them separately? Can I put one in my microgrid controller? You don't know these things, right? Like how would I possibly know this? Um, I was doing the solar design and I'm like, do we have anything to deal with the shading, And I talked to one of the solar guys. They're like, oh yeah, we have these things called optimizers now. And he
Yeah.
explains that optimizers are these cool little things that allow for, if you have a tree that shades one of your solar panels, what used to happen for the listener, if you didn't know, the whole string would go down in efficiency. It would just totally kill the efficiency if just one of the panels was damaged, shaded, whatever had happened to it. Something, a bunch of dirt fell on that one. Now with the optimizers, it allows that one element not to affect the efficiency of the whole string. Anyways, you're just constantly learning what I don't know right now. But it feels very fulfilling and it's busy. Yeah. So
What we leave college with, it turns out, was the most economic way to fit everything we would need to know to find out everything we didn't know.
yeah,
It's a way of it's a I don't know. There's a not that people need this analogy necessarily, but I think of it sometimes as when you start college, you don't really have a barn or a silo to put anything that you have into for storage,
Hmm.
and you wouldn't even know how to open the door. And after that's the best that we could say is at least you know how to open the door to your barn and you know how to put things into it now.
Yeah, yeah,
You know
exactly. I
what
mean,
categories.
you have an idea about how to get an idea or learn, at least
Yep.
at the bare minimum. But yeah, it's definitely been. Uh, it's one of those things where you're like, oh wow, you're just so much I need to know, and there's so much I'm forgetting constantly, and like, oh
Yeah.
wait, I need to relearn that again. There's a lot of just like, oh, I need to go back to the book to look at this, and it's so funny. I think a lot of times when you're hunting around for answers, even just like school where you would go to the book and sometimes you just
Hmm.
read the book and you realize if you
Yeah.
hadn't read the book well, and a lot of times in college you're reading, they're like, hey, read the book before the lesson so that the lesson makes
Right.
sense. But when you're reading the book before the lesson, it's really not making
No.
sense, right? You're just kind of like, this is hieroglyphics a little bit. You're like, okay, cool. And then during the lesson, yeah, maybe it does help. You're like, okay, I remember reading something about this.
Yeah.
But one of the things is like, that's why they tell you to go back and read the book again after you've had the lesson and read the book. A lot of times you don't have time to do that shit. You might if you run into a problem, right? Which is
Yeah.
kind of the way you have to. But the same goes for work. It's just there's so many more handbooks or books you
Hmm.
need to reference if
Hmm.
you're trying to find the answer. And sometimes it's
Hmm.
which is the right book, like, hey, which book I'm supposed to be going.
Right.
But I found that most of the time is in the electrical engineering field, it's the NEC manual, NFPA 70. That thing will, and the handbook has pictures too. So there is that. Just the manual you can usually find. Um, you have to pay for it, or your company hopefully pays for it. We get a license of it, but the handbook has pictures, which is really cool because you do need to see like actually when it's talking about um, cables going over 2000, anything over 4 AWG, which is American wire gauge sizing, needing to be only single layer on a cable tray, and they need to be spaced 2.15 times the diameter. That's your spacing. Like
Yep.
it's good to see pictures when that's being described to
Yeah.
you because you're like, I need to see what you mean by this, right? Um, but it's fun, as boring as mundane as this might sound to some of our listeners, and I can imagine reading through some manuals and then
Yeah.
looking at some obscure electrical code sounds boring, but what I'm trying to describe is the process of kind of figuring things out is
Hmm.
really fulfilling. There is a fulfilling thing where you're like, hey, I'm designing this cable tray and I'm literally creating the physical layout and I'm looking through a data sheet on the layout.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the line, one of my managers is like, hey, do we need a 24-inch cable do we need a 24-inch cable tray for all the cables we're using? And I'm like, I don't know. Let me look at what the cables are. So I'm looking at the cable data sheets. You start to go, okay, well, these are the ratings. These are the values of that.
Yeah.
How close can these be together? And you start, then you
Yeah.
kind of have to go through this engineering rabbit hole and read all the proper information. So you're like, hey, I'm doing this right. And, and you'll run into things where you're like, wait, it says that anything at bigger than 4 AWG can't be more than one layer. And I see that my
Hmm.
boss had bundled them on each other. So I'm like, how do you get away with that? Well, lucky for me, my boss is really good at writing notes about what he does. He
Right.
wrote Article 392, section,
Yep.
dot 80, dot 20, A and B. And so I go down to that section and it writes out, actually, you can triplex these if they're this size, if you're doing this. And I'm like, oh, why are we doing this? And so the process of figuring things out has been really enjoyable, I would say, also. So,
My not this happened this week, but my hero turn during the fall. I was contacted by a student from the Computer Science Engineering Technology program, so a CSET major,
okay.
who I don't work with as commonly for any number of reasons. There was maybe a greater barrier of access between me and that department
Yeah.
historically. So this student contacted me and said, and this is, I've mentioned this in the past, and I love to bring it up over and over again. This is called the XY problem. So the student will say, I want to accomplish X, and they'll describe that. And in this case, what they wanted to do was um, they wanted to pick up, amplify, and process. So sense, boost the signal, and then process the signal from human biology. They wanted to get brainwave measurements. They
Okay.
literally want to put a halo on someone's head
Yeah.
and pick up the brain waves. Well, we've reached a point in technological sophistication where that's no longer a thing that's science fiction. It's science fact now.
Yeah. Multiple
And
startups around here are doing that right now.
totally.
Yeah.
And not only is it science fact, we can actually interpret those signals with much more accuracy slash resolution than we used to be able to.
Yeah.
So the sense, amplify, and process are three stages in a signal, like coming up with something meaningful or useful from a signal that we can measure in nature. So sensing is relatively straightforward. The electrodes are, those are off the shelf. And amplifying is also relatively straightforward because it turns out there's just a bunch of common electrical hardware that we learn about in college that you can plug into a signal, put it into a signal chain, and boost that signal. Amplifiers are very common, and we studied them in second year or second term electrical engineering. So those are your op amps.
And they become the centerpiece to your beginning of your junior electrical engineering
Mm-hmm.
series, the
Mm-hmm.
electronic. I think that's just electrical engineering 301 or 331. What's the series that?
Well, you spend a lot of time working with op amps in EE 225, which is your second term of
Yeah,
circuits.
yeah,
But
circuits, but
then,
then it comes back around in the
absolutely,
yeah, and it is basically what you focus most of your first term in your junior year of electronics.
absolutely.
Um, yeah, and comes back around for for instrumentation op amps, of course,
Yep.
because we're talking about modulating a signal and manipulating a signal, boosting and
Oftentimes, signals will enter an electronic device. In order for the device to be useful at all, it has to have an output that we've engineered, that we've designed the output of that signal. And oftentimes, it has to be boosted or increased, or, and I didn't mention this one, filtered.
yes,
So part of the student's design needed to have amplification and filters. So that was when we talk about filters in electronics, sometimes signals are, think of a sound that's high pitched, think of a sound that's low pitched, and then think of a sound that's kind of in the middle. Well, that works in electronics as well. So high, medium, and low filters. And then the processor was a specific integrated circuit. It's a computer chip, and she had to put all this together into like design a board and put the stuff into it and then configure it, right? This whole
yeah,
thing you can imagine as something that anyone who's gone to our university and spent 4, 5, 6 years there taking these courses would probably be able to figure out and do. Except what she wants to do has to be done in May,
yeah,
at the end of May, right? She needs to
and
turn all this in
in
for grade.
college you could probably do this too because getting shit done at the last minute is also a skill that you learn to do in school as well. And you'd be amazed at how much you can get done in a small period of time when you're really motivated. The limiting factor might be the procurement of equipment,
Exactly.
of
Well,
course.
the X problem that she was presenting to me was um, to do with designing printed circuit boards, through hole or surface mounting the parts onto a circuit board and soldering them, testing this whole board. And what she was proposing was something that would be ambitious to do in a year and
Mm,
probably would take up the better part of a year and a half because printed circuit boards have to be manufactured out of house. They have to be made someplace else.
Yeah.
And then you make them on campus. You put the parts on campus. So the hero turn was I read what she was asking about.
Mm-hmm.
And mercifully, she supplied some of the ICs and some of the other circuit elements that she was looking into getting.
Okay.
And this is where what you and I do is comparable. Well, the first thing you do is go to the manufacturer's website and read a little bit about the spec sheets that they provide. But what students rarely know, but that you and I know, is that manufacturers of all kinds, and particular integrated circuit manufacturers, like to do things like supply you with sample amounts of their product and dev boards
Mm-hmm.
or calibration boards. And that means that they've taken their circuit and they've put it in the ideally designed printed circuit board with all the parts already there. So what you do is you plug your sensors into it,
Mm-hmm.
provide power, and then measure the output signal. And so this is so unusual to encounter in a lot of different areas of academia. Like I said, we never teach our students this.
Yeah.
How would they ever know that this is a possibility? And it takes years of like doing this type of work, consulting, and then understanding how suppliers work. Right there, she shows up. We have our meeting. I said, "Would you like to just buy this development board that has all the pieces made for you already, or do you want to really struggle with making a PCB?" She's like, "I'm going to spend the $60 on that board that's already built. Come on,
Yeah.
I've got a degree to earn.
I got a degree to earn and a life to live. Jeez. Yeah, that's great.
So I solved the why problem, which was not all this other stuff, which is a lot of content and time and resource,
Yeah.
right, heavy. The why problem is, I just need to test the signal that I've measured and turn in a report. That's the why problem. So I know this is something that I think you and I confront a lot.
I think so too. God, I struggle because school was really useful. I needed to learn how to learn difficult things that you do need to learn. But I'm learning difficult things on the job all the time right now too, and they could be a little bit more in alignment.
Right.
Referencing the NEC, if you're an electrical engineer, the fact that it's not bought by every school that has an electrical engineering program, the license isn't readily available to all students, and that teachers aren't making them reference it to learn and answer questions. Hey, guys, we're going to be, today we're going to do a practice. We're going to be designing a small little circuit board or whatever. This is going to mimic a medium, a small, low voltage system, right? So 480 volts and lower. There's a medium voltage. 480 volts could be considered at the bare end of medium, but we'll just say we're going to design the system. It's going to mimic that. Oh no, 12208. We'll just do that. 12208 system. We're going to mimic this system. And we're going to route some cables and stuff like that. So first we'll do circuits. You can do kind of a micro where we're explaining fundamentals of electricity, resistance, amperage, current and voltage, all of those, RLC circuits, active and passive circuitry. We explain that with the basics. And then you go, okay, now halfway through the lesson, we're like, now let's talk about what this looks like in the home, or what this looks like in a commercial building. In the building we're in right now, they could just keep using the Portland Metro building, right? It's a perfect building to go, hey, well, these sockets right here looks like they have a welding socket right there. So that has that's 60 amps versus all the rest of them around here, right? Because we can plug in something that has a really large draw at first, surge volt, so much teaching opportunity. And we could use real and kind of just balance that. So anyways, I do think about how nice it would be if we updated a little bit of it to represent, a challenging day at work every day. Much like school, you're going through many of the same practices. On a side note, my dad and I have had 2 conversations as of recently, and we have not talked for many years. during our first conversation, things got spicy to say the least. Um, I was telling him how, he was justifying why making me an indentured servant was totally fine.
Right.
And I was telling him why it was not good. From the psychology to a child of like what it does to a child to make them feel like a worker their whole time. Especially if they're like getting straight A's and doing like the right thing, when you're making them work regardless of like them doing the right thing, how it could feel like they're always being punished for doing the right thing and therefore feel like doing the right thing less and less because no one cares. Tried to explain this to him. It's tricky because I don't know if boomers, my headset for a second messed up. I don't know if boomers understand this nuance or if it was my dad or what specifically. But one of the things that I noticed is that he kept going, why? He was like, well, how do you get a kid to learn how to work? How do they learn how to work? And I kept going, well, there's 8 hours a day of school that a kid has to go to from when they're pretty young, right until they leave for college or for work. Mm-hmm. And it's weird. They shift from being at school where they spend 8 hours a day doing something, producing something, learning something, to leaving to the adult world where they spend 8 hours a day doing something, working. And I was like, it's almost as if you make sure they do well at school and that they treat that as the job, their primary job as a student, as a kid, which it kind of is. Going to school is your job as a kid. The most consistent job. You have other duties as a child, of course, learning other things outside of school as well, and interactions and social, all that stuff. And so I just was like, I don't see how you guys don't understand that, like, going to school is the job because you replace it with a job. Like, it could not be more straightforward. I don't know. You don't need to make them work every second they're out of school, because then it feels like all they're ever doing is working. So guess what? The second they leave the house, when you send them to go to school or go do a job, the last thing I wanted to do was work at all, and all I did was fuck off. So,
So that's conversation number one?
That was conversation number one. Yeah. I mean,
you had another one.
We had another one. It was far more mundane. He just, wanted to see the grandkids and everything like that. But, yeah, we did have that conversation. I would say it went like this. But hold on. You saw it went like this. Sorry. You see the down, and then it like ended there. It ended there. It's like it was neutral. It did this and to his credit, he sat around for about 35, 40 minutes and listened to me mostly talk. And for a narcissist to listen and take criticism, we'll say quotations, take it, was impressive, I would say. There were a couple times where he's like, oh, you seem angry. I don't think I need to listen to this. And I'm like, well, I was like, you don't. But if you're going to stay, I'm going to keep dishing it to you. I was just very matter of fact with it. So, but yeah.
Congratulations on having a conversation where you redressed some of your history with this individual, this parenting figure.
Yeah, he, it was all news to him, which is...
That's a great way to put it.
It's how he took it. He was like, I'm very surprised. This doesn't seem like, I'm not remembering this at all. I mean, he had misremembered everything. He was like, well, I didn't beat you every day or every week and stuff. And I was like, how many times do you need to beat a kid for it to be too many? I was like, you didn't beat me much. He's like, I only spanked you 2 times. And I was like, oh, whoa, we're really misremembering numbers. I think I brought up him using a board a couple times. He had completely forgotten. Like, he made me select boards. Like, there's I tell my wife this line, but there was a time, And I punched my sister. I was like 12. She was 10. I'm sure she had it coming, but I was a little bit too old to be punching anybody in your sibling. And I gave her a sock in the face for something. I don't remember why I punched her. I do remember the punishment because my dad made me pick out a board from the woodshed. And I picked a thin one, not understanding physics very well yet, obviously. Still don't understand it that well, but I understand it enough now that the thin one was the wrong choice. And my dad goes, all right, I'm going to let you pick that one. And then after I spank you with this, you can go pick a different board. So he spanked me with that one. And then I went and picked a really flat, wide ass board after that to distribute the pain. But yeah, that whole incident happened. And I laugh because that's what you do about it. But that's not a good thing. That's not a good incident overall to have happened.
Look at the mess. So you and I have the luxury of looking at that scenario and saying, okay, what was this in service of? And what was the actual end, quote unquote, lesson that you took away from it?
Pick wider boards to get hit with. And if you're trying to do damage, get the thinner board if you're in trouble. Use the bat to defend yourself and use the board to defend your ass.
Totally. And what ideally, I think in his mind would have been the outcome would have been how you interacted with your sibling. So we totally missed the message. We have another XY problem. Right?
Yeah, it's like, man, if I want to hurt my sister next time, I'll hit her with the right board.
Exactly. Yeah. Where's the actual this? And so I don't mind steering this back to talking about things that we do for our careers now, but I like to just kind of call out when we talk about these scenarios. You and I will laugh about being literally brutalized by our parents. Here's a funny story. Mm-hmm. Anyone who wasn't brutalized by their family will go, oh my God, that is an awful story. We're like, yeah, that's the half of it. But that is the microcosmic perspective on how that affects us for the rest of our lives in every one of our relationships that we have, how we comport ourselves in the business environment, how we comport ourselves in college, how we think through these things, and how we end up with hundreds of hours of leave because we can't imagine taking it and it not being and there not being some consequence on the other side. We can't imagine having these balanced lives because of these painful lessons that were shown to us where we weren't taught the actual lesson. We learned something else, which was, you have to work until you die, and if you stop, somebody will hit you with a stick.
Yeah, it was really, it was tough because the whole time we're talking, I really wanted to just be like, all the lessons you thought you were trying to teach me, while whatever intention you had in mind, the execution resulted in like the opposite of your intent, like, oh, you wanted me to have work ethic. I was like, when I left for school, the freedom, I could barely stay in class. I couldn't wait to party. I worked to get enough money so that I could go party and do everything but work. Play video games, go out, get drunk with friends, and have a good time. And that extended through the Army. I mean, shit, when I was joining the Army, I was like, it was a recession. I needed money. I needed a college degree. All of those things I needed. But in the back of my head, I was like, this will be really nice. It'll make me a man that isn't getting effed up and partying all the time. I'll have discipline, right? And then I joined this place and it's like, oh shit, it's a whole bunch of other individuals like me. And we're all being triggered by Big Daddy Green Dick. And all he makes me want to do is do more of the drinking, the partying, and the substances and stuff. And, you find that out. And, it's funny. I've listened to, I think I directed you towards this, but a lot of these veteran podcasts, there's been a lot of drama this last year because, turns out there's a bunch of liars in the military. A lot of people who are probably traumatized as children or fucked up, and and they're trying to cover their trauma with, they're trying to make their
Mm-hmm.
service more than it was, which I
Mm-hmm.
completely understand. And I know many other soldiers who do. And um, thankfully, I've avoided that trap, and I could have easily gone there having not deployed, and just wanting to make my service seem like it was just,
Yeah.
hooah, especially as an infantryman. But I was listening to this one Green Beret guy, Valhalla, I think is his channel or something like that. Anyways, and he was just talking, and I knew what he was trying to describe. And he was saying, like, he was saying, quit worshiping Green Beret specifically. Um,
Right.
because he wanted to explain, and I knew this because I've gone through the psych eval for the Green Beret. Because so in 2 weeks in hell, there's a week ish of psychological evaluation, by the way. So, like, every night you're taking these written tests. I think I've explained this, but they're long.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of them are asking, like, do you like flowers or do you like to start fires, stuff like that. And if you say you don't like flowers, then you must like fires, and then suddenly you're committed on fires. You better say you like all the fires, otherwise you're a hypocrite in the test too. So there's a lot of psychological shit happening there. I was like a gardener by the end of it, because I was like, well, I don't know if I want to say I like fires, because I'll come up across as a psychopath. So I was like, I guess I like flowers. But then every time a flower question came up, it was like, hey, would you rescue your friend from, getting too drunk at a bar, or would you go with the flowers? And you're like, I guess I'm a flower tender. Fuck you, dude. No, like, so you're taking these psychological tests. I know. This is my train of thought while I'm going through. I was like, please don't look like a psychopath the whole time. Turns out that didn't work. No, but what they are testing for is a little bit of psychopathy, like a measurable amount of sociopathy,
Right.
because they're looking for a certain profile. And of course, if you're looking for that trait, then you're going to get other traits that go along with it, potentially people who fucking lie, or like are
Mm-hmm.
fucked up individuals, or have been traumatized in their
Mm-hmm.
childhood, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what he was just trying to describe is, like, they're, I mean, respect veterans and so on and so forth and stuff, but don't necessarily idolize these men as like some gods or heroes or anything. And he was saying that, like, the Green Beret filters for a little bit of sociopathy. So there is, like, and these guys can be really good dads and really good, he was trying to kind of, but I understood what he meant.
Yeah.
And I know what I mean when it's like, veterans are just people who, um, who served, who made a decision to serve, and for whatever reason they made a decision to serve. But um, I this idea that there isn't so much baggage thrown in there necessarily, because of the socioeconomic conditions that create the idea in many people's heads to find a way to get ahead or get out of that situation. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
I have dozens and dozens of follow-on thoughts to that, but um, I was going through stuff at my house, and I came across this thing, and maybe you've seen it, maybe you've seen some of it, but if you spend a couple of 4-year tours in the service, what you'll encounter are these things that I think they're known in the wider public as challenge coins.
yes.
And so this is a coin. This is a disc of pewter, or some other. It's probably bronze, but a disc of metal that has been embossed or detailed or sculpted in some way to reflect either a unit, a commander, a deployment, something that's being embellished by this coin, and it's a commemorative artifact. And so the first one that I ever earned, it was when in my first duty station, I was still a private, and I had invented this thing that made our emplacement process take a fraction of the amount of time for howitzers. And I will put a pin in that description, but essentially what I did was take something that took 3 hours and it took 30 minutes. And that was
Efficiency.
totally, and that was recognized by someone who had connections in the brigade, the this is a much higher level of
An
organization
officer
than where I
noticed,
was.
didn't it? It had to have been an
Yeah.
officer. This
Yeah,
smells like a
totally.
nerd noticed something, you
Yeah.
know? And
And so I earned this. I earned the Commanding General's coin. This was a big deal. And the distinction is coins are informal, so they're not in your records per se. It's not like an Army Achievement Medal or a Commendation Medal,
no.
bronze this or a star that. No, those don't go in your record and you don't wear them on your uniform, but you are given these coins and they're prestigious, except they're totally informal.
And they've by the time I was in the Army, I don't know, and maybe because I was in the soft training program for a while, and they think that shit is nerdy, right? You know,
Yeah.
like they
Yeah,
say, "Oh,
totally.
coin, cool," you know, it's like
Yeah.
so. And then when I got to LURS, they also, even though they're way less high speed, they still think they think they're even more high
Yeah.
speed. So they didn't care about the coins either. But we were next to a
Exactly.
cav unit, and we were attached to a cav unit, and you know they fucking cared about the damn coins.
They love their
They
coins.
love
as a
the
cow.
coins, and you know that too specifically. So it's funny because
So
yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
just mentioning that I was cleaning up my stuff and I came across my trove of challenge coins.
Nice. Those
And
I thought they were cool, like Pogs from back in the day. You know?
totally, that would, yes, for people of your generation, the pog would be a very appropriate analogy.
Yeah, the heavy one that you used to use on the other ones, right? That's immediately I was like, oh, cool, they got Pogs, and like they're like, oh yeah, challenge. I got one in basic training actually. I got the company. I got a basic. I got coined, and I got a ceremony award because I won. I was the best shot in my basic training company. I got
Totally.
the Eagle Eye, whatever. So, and that was cool. I thought it was cool at the time, and then like after I got out, we went to Airborne, and then I went to SWIC, and they were like, "That's gay." Get the like they were immediately like, "Oh, cool, you got your basic training company coin." Oh, and I was all like, "Oh, I thought it was cool." Yeah, no, like put that away, nerd.
Big time.
I know, I got big timed. Yeah, and that's the only coin I ever got because of where my military career, where I went. They didn't care about that shit, so I don't even know if I still have that thing. But yeah.
I don't have a count of them. It was obscene. The number of them I have is obscene.
That's awesome.
If they matter to you. If they don't matter to you, it's also obscene because it's like, who cares? It's a bunch of metal.
You know what? I'm sorry, but as a like, if anything, here's my morbid, funny thought. When someone's going through your shit when you're dead and they find your treasure troves, kids who are helping their fathers clean out your shit when they've bought your house or whatever. And by the way, I've been that kid when my dad was flipping houses. When you find that, it's the coolest thing ever. You're like, what are these cool coins? It's like finding treasure. So I will say, either way, someone's going to find them and think it's super cool. Or they'll either know what it is and think it's super cool or be like, oh, what's this? And, maybe go down a rabbit hole. So
I'm having the fantasy in my mind of going to my little 6-year-old niece and saying, now, sweetie, your uncle carried this coin in a sensitive part of his body until he got out of the war, and now it's yours.
He held this thing in the only place he could, his ass. And I held this uncomfortable hunk of metal in my ass for 2 years before he died of dysentery.
Going, I don't even know who you are.
That might be one of my top 5 all-time favorite scenes in a movie, just right off the bat. God
We
damn.
should mention, for those who haven't yet seen Pulp Fiction, this is a scene from the Quentin Tarantino film Pulp Fiction. Rent it at your local video stores today.
Yeah, at the one Blockbuster. It exists in Bend, Oregon. So
anyway, I mentioned these coins because I said I was going through stuff and I found them. I wanted to give everyone context, but I found the one that said "Mission accomplished, Iraq." And this, you brightened up because you lived through the period of time where one of the single most embarrassing gaffes, because back then embarrassing gaffes were calling a job done that wasn't done. Get ready, America. There's about to be a lot more that are a lot more what's the word? influential. They're going to cause more pain and suffering in your lives. But here
Yeah.
we go. Back then, a gaffe like, let's put up a banner on a ship and talk about mission accomplished.
Yes.
We're on the eve of another 20 more years of that war going on.
Yeah, well, and
I
we were
found
like, who knew we were like actually completely destabilizing the entire Middle East, creating a vacuum of which Iran could totally like create
totally.
influence. And now we've finally come full circle to where we've allowed Israel to wipe out all of those problems within a year.
Yeah, totally. So
Uh,
another episode we'll talk about that. Anyway, I
Jeez,
found
yeah,
this coin and I'm doing this thing where I'm linking together two very specifically different ideas into one place. And so those coins always represent a modicum of accomplishment or achievement. They represent, someone noticing that I had done some performance or that I was at a place that merited it. Just everybody got that coin. It was spread like,
yeah,
seed corn. And then I want to bring us back to that idea of vets having this kind of conflict of inflation, of inflating what they were doing. And I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Her name is Heidi Prieb. If you look her up on YouTube or do a search on YouTube for CPTSD. And there's a couple of people that talk about complex trauma, and I listened to Heidi Prieb a couple episodes from her channel, and one of the things that she emphasizes about complex PTSD is that we might come from homes that are not friendly places. Maybe there's a economic disparity in the home from everyone else. Maybe there's you're just embarrassed by your family because they're so violent or unpredictable or mercurial or whatever it is.
yeah.
And what she describes is the setup for lying about yourself or using, lies by omission. When you have to talk about yourself, what you do is you make up a different story. And that different story is about protecting yourself from the shameful or embarrassing or painful aspects of your life.
I
And what have I said before? What's this unifying feature of vets sometimes? Their
yeah,
complex traumatic history. So
sure.
yeah, you're
And
talking about this exact
build
thing.
I could build off of that because I've done this before in the past where because it's and not about my military career but about my past because and it was funny when I was talking to my dad, he was like, I didn't beat you every week, I wasn't doing he goes, my dad beat me every week, and he was like, not to
Uh-huh.
compare, dads or whatever. And I was like, that's easier. And he's like, oh, so now you know that my situation is easier. And I was like, I'll explain why yours is easier. If it was every week, you know what's coming, it's expected, and it's routine. I was like, I was afraid of you because I never knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And the not knowing of when the bomb was going to land, of what the punishment would be. Not like it's going to be this thing. Oh, hey, I'm coming in for my weekly beating. Okay, I'm going to get beating. Maybe there'll be some variation. Maybe he'll hit my ass more, my back more, whatever it is. But you kind of
Right.
know, like, I'm getting a beating. With the fear that was put on my house, it was unpredictable. It was more
Mm-hmm.
psychological. It was more subtle necessarily. It didn't have to be as raw as just a
Mm-hmm.
beating necessarily. It was the unknown. And I think a lot of people can understand this fear, but describing that, especially when you're young, it's really impossible. It requires a lot of reflection to be able to
Yeah.
describe it without being emotionally harmed by it or going into
Right.
a spiral or where I would feel my gut start to tense up if I was describing this even a couple years ago, because I would start to remember the events. But now, so I think sometimes it's just so much easier to say like, oh, I was, it would be in this case, I was beaten it would be easier to say those kind of lies sometimes because going into a 3-hour conversation with someone who, maybe you're trying to describe your upbringing, but
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to go
Mm-hmm.
into all of that with them and explain the
Right.
nuance of psychological horror. And you might not even be equipped to do it you might not even have, most people haven't even reflected on this
Yeah.
enough. And so it's
Yeah.
much easier to just say, like, this happened to me. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And I think a lot of times that has something to do with it. You know, the complexity of it itself and the nuance is so challenging to parse through, let alone describe or understand for the individual, that it's far easier to just fabricate a much easier story like blah 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 died, blah 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 was beaten, I was raped,
Yep.
something that people that understand, oh, you were beaten or you were molested or raped or whatever, these are things that they'll have a visceral image in their head, and it sums up trauma really well. If you want them to stop talking about it, you can say like that. And so I think those kind of things go into the psychology as well. To add to her point that you're bringing up, Heidi's point. So
her name is I think it's Heidi Prieb, and I'm blanking on some of the other people who talk about this topic, but complex PTSD or CPTSD is a search term. And there's another person who talks. She calls her channel "Crappy Childhood Fairy." It's a clever clever way to position herself in this topic area, but that the reality of our lives in those family systems are so tragic and painful, and all the superlative words I could use to really like call out that it's just not the ideal American experience at all. Maybe that was a slip of the tongue there, experiment.
yeah,
But the American experience, but that as a consequence of that, it drives us towards um, creating a different or new or fabricated environment around those tragedies. And sometimes they seem like minor tragedies, but minor tragedies that are chronic, unpredictable, and unpredictable in their escalation at the time are are significant. And so when you match this up with and the whole anecdote about the coins was I brought that up because the act of service is attendant or it's a through line in our service careers in the armed forces, where depending on the type of unit culture you're in, you might get all these different types of accolades, or you'll experience these congratulatory gestures, or you'll get an award of achievement here, or an advancement here, or something like that that sort of validates the little pieces. And I'm not even trying to say that the regular army is vastly more better at attaboys, sprinkled over time. I'm just saying that this is the consequence of those types of unit cultures. And when you're serving in special forces, special operations, Green Berets, Rangers, um, that super high speed aviation unit, and from Fort Campbell, like I think it's the 161st or something like that. But anyway, like you've got all these different variations on um, the special uh, operations part of the military. I think that you really totally lose that cultural recognition in those units about the little things that you've done. And so there are things about the experience that are uh, extraordinary. There are lots of days in the serving in the armed forces that are just ordinary and de rigueur and boring. And then there are moments in those service periods that are extraordinary because of where you're at or who you're interacting with, or the magnitude of ordnance you're working with. And that out of those units, and I didn't serve there, so I'm making this assumption, there's just not a whole lot of, hey man, here's a coin that says mission accomplished that reflects on the extraordinary nature of what you did today.
yeah. It's so funny
So
too.
it turns into that. It's a confluence of never getting any type of momentary acknowledgement of what happened. It might even be that it can't be talked about because of its secret nature, and coming from the family systems that you and I have been describing, that just completely dysregulate how we recognize qualification or achievement.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And probably, oh crap, a good place for us to end the pod at. We're at hour and 10.
Yeah.
Um, well, hey everybody. Thanks for listening to us ramble on about veteran experiences, trauma, some engineering, and consulting overlap there. And we really appreciate you guys coming back for 2025 to listen to us again. Um, and I've been enjoying our free form. I think this has been a fun way to go about talking. We really got into the history last year, and we might revisit some other historical topics as we go. But I've been enjoying this, so I just wanted to say thanks to everybody who's been listening. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and thumbs it up, and share it, and do all that other stuff so that people can see our ugly mugs talk some more about all of this shit. And as always,
Man.
Richard. Nah, I'm just joking. Richard looks great, and I'm doing okay. Down here in the Bay, I'm doing okay. I'm a Bay Area 8 in LA where it's on fire. I'd be a 4 because that's where all the pretty people go.
You'll always be a Portland 10 in my heart.
A Portland 10, that's right. Oh God, I would. It's crazy, but there's a lot of really attractive dudes up in Portland. Tall guys. Portland's a tall town. Oregon's a tall state. If you didn't know,
It's that Scandinavian influence.
it totally is, man.
It's rangy.
When I was in Portland, I'm 6'1". I was like the shortest dude in my friend group for a bit. Like everyone seemed like they were like 6'3" or taller. Anyways, side note. Anyways, party people, love y'all. We'll talk to you soon, and I'll see you next week, Richard.
Right on, man. I'll see you next time.
Cheers.